What really happened behind the smooth falsetto voice that made Eddie Kendricks a Motown legend? From co-founding the iconic Temptations and leading unforgettable hits like Just My Imagination and The Way You Do the Things You Do, to a solo career crowned by the chart-topping Keep On Truckin', Eddie Kendricks' story is much more than the music you know. But beneath the spotlight lay a painful, hidden tale. A life marked by struggle, an untimely and tragic death, and an abandoned home that tells a story no one expected. What was the real cost of fame? What was his net worth at the time of his passing? And what secrets did his family and lifestyle hide? Join us as we step inside Eddie Kendricks' abandoned house and uncover the untold, heartbreaking story that Motown never told you. Eddie Kendricks was born on December 17, 1939, in Union Springs, Alabama, to Johnny and Lee Bell Kendricks. He grew up alongside his 4 siblings, a sister named Patricia, and 3 brothers, Charles, Robert, and Clarence. At a young age, the family moved to the Ensley neighborhood of Birmingham. Even as a child, Eddie showed a no-nonsense attitude. One day in elementary school, a boy poured a bucket of mop water on him. Despite his slim frame, Eddie didn't back down. He stood up and gave the boy a thorough beating. Surprisingly, instead of turning into enemies, they quickly became best friends when they realized they had a lot in common and lived just a few blocks apart. From that point on, the two were inseparable partners in mischief, often finding themselves in trouble together. Their bond grew stronger as they attended school together, from elementary all the way through Western Owen High, now Jackson Owen High, and worshipped side by side at Macedonia Baptist Church. That boy was none other than Paul Williams, who would later become Eddie's lifelong friend and musical collaborator. Beyond their childhood antics, music was a shared passion that ran deep. They spent countless hours singing together, both in their church choir and practicing on the porches of their homes, dreaming of making it big one day. Around 1955, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, and friends Kel Osborne and Willie Waller formed a doo-wop group called the Cavaliers and started performing around Birmingham. Although Waller left the group in 1957, the remaining members stayed determined to follow their dreams, even though their parents, rooted in religious beliefs, disapproved of their pursuit of secular music. Their strong drive to succeed came from a shared frustration. They didn't like the paths their parents were trying to set for them. Paul had decided he wasn't going to finish high school, even though he was just 2 credits shy of graduating, going against his mother's wishes. Eddie was being pushed toward working in a slaughterhouse, a job he had absolutely no passion for. Meanwhile, Kel's stepfather wanted him to become a minister. For them to break free and make their own way, they knew they had to leave Birmingham. So, in 1958, they hatched a plan. After finishing high school, Kel worked at a local hardware store for 6 months and saved up enough money to help get them out of town. Eddie added to the funds by taking his brother's income tax check. Together, the 3 of them boarded a Greyhound bus and headed to Cincinnati, but their journey didn't stop there. They soon changed course and made their way to Cleveland, where they reconnected with Willie Waller. Willie let them stay at his mother's house for a few weeks while they figured out their next steps. As they auditioned for singing gigs, they worked as dishwashers at the Majestic Hotel to pay the bills. Though they hadn't yet landed a record deal, their story caught the attention of a local newspaper, which dubbed them the Dishwashing Trio. That headline brought them to the notice of a local manager named Milton Jenkins. Jenkins took them under his wing, becoming their manager and suggesting they move to Detroit, the new promised land for aspiring musicians. To give them a fresh start and a professional look, Jenkins renamed the group The Primes and outfitted them with stylish clothes and suits to help them stand out and look the part. When they arrived in Detroit, the group threw themselves into non-stop rehearsals, working tirelessly to perfect their vocals, their top priority. Milton Jenkins also formed a girl group made up of Florence Ballard, Mary Wilson, Diana Ross, and Betty McGlown, calling them the Primettes. Unfortunately, they didn't land a recording contract, and the group disbanded in 1961 when Kell decided to move to California. Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams returned to Alabama around the same time. By chance, Eddie heard that another group, The Distance, had just received an offer from Berry Gordy's Motown label, but had lost 2 members, Mooch, Harold, and Richard Street. Eddie reached out to Otis Williams and asked if he could step in to fill the gap. Otis welcomed him and agreed to let Paul join as well. With this, the lineup was complete. Paul Williams and Eddie Kendricks from the Primes joined Otis Williams, Melvin Franklin, and Elbridge Al Bryant from The Distance. They initially called themselves the Elgins, but soon changed the name to The Temptations after discovering another group already had rights to the Elgins. Before launching their own career, The Temptations began singing backup for Mary Wells. Their early singles, led by Paul Williams, didn't make much impact, but that changed in 1962 when Dream Come True, written by Berry Gordy and featuring Eddie Kendricks as lead vocalist, climbed to number 22 on the R&B charts. This was just the beginning of their rise. The next 4 singles didn't do well at all, but Berry Gordy never lost faith in the group. Things started to change when the rebellious Al Bryant was let go and David Ruffin joined the lineup. This marked the birth of what fans now call the Classic Five. To make the story even more exciting, the legendary Smokey Robinson began working closely with them. His smooth love ballads were a perfect fit, bringing out the best in each member. In 1964, The Way You Do the Things You Do shot them into the spotlight, and from that moment on, there was no looking back. Hit after hit followed, kicking off the group's golden era. The magic of the Classic Five went far beyond their incredible vocals. They each brought something unique to the table with their distinct personalities. Eddie Kendricks was the spark plug, with his unmistakable falsetto that lit up every song. David Ruffin was the fuel, powering their performances with his intense energy and voice. Melvin Franklin, known for his playful spirit, held everyone together like glue. Paul Williams was the dynamic dancer, always bringing life and excitement to the stage. And Otis Williams, with his commanding presence and sharp leadership, kept the group organized and focused. With all these elements combined, it's fair to say that no group compares to the Temptations' Classic Five. No matter the genre, their legacy remains unmatched. Even after his closest friend, Paul Williams, was quietly moved from co-lead vocals and David Ruffin stepped in to take his place, the Temptations only continued to soar in popularity. Eddie Kendricks, affectionately nicknamed Cornbread by the group for his love of the Southern dish, had become a standout star. Fans adored him, but so did his peers. Artists like Martha Reeves, Mary Wilson, and Diana Ross, who had known Eddie from their early days performing as the Primes and the Pretts, were all taken by his charm. With his smooth falsetto, tall frame, striking looks, and those sharp silk suits that hugged his slim build, Eddie was magnetic. It wasn't just about the voice. The man had presence. It was no wonder women screamed his name wherever he went. But as the saying goes, when you pray for success, pray just as hard for the strength to carry its weight. By 1965, changes were already starting to stir behind the scenes at Motown. The Temptations' success came with pressure, politics, and personal sacrifice. And for Eddie Kendricks, that pressure would start to take a heavy toll. A series of behind-the-scenes tensions and emotional battles marked the beginning of a slow unraveling, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The first cracks in Eddie Kendricks' relationship with the Temptations began to show when the group's creative direction shifted. Smokey Robinson, whose smooth, romantic ballads had perfectly suited Eddie's airy falsetto, was replaced by Norman Whitfield as the group's primary songwriter. Whitfield ushered in a bold new era of psychedelic soul, inspired by the growing influence of artists like Sly Stone. While the new sound was a commercial hit, Eddie wasn't a fan. He missed the emotional depth and melodic beauty of Smokey's love songs, songs that allowed his voice to shine in its natural element. Beyond that, Eddie felt his role in the group being gradually diminished. He had invested everything into the Temptations, not just as a lead vocalist, but as a co-writer of several major hits, the arranger of many of their vocal harmonies, and even their unofficial stylist. That last role, inspired by his mentor Milton Jenkins back in the Prime's days, was one he took seriously. Eddie had an eye for fashion, and it became part of the group's signature image. So when decisions he once had a hand in were suddenly made without him, he felt pushed aside, and it hurt. Things only got more tense when David Ruffin, now the breakout star of the group, began acting out. Fame had clearly inflated his ego, and whispers of his erratic behavior soon became loud conversations. When the group started discussing the possibility of firing him, Ruffin didn't take it lightly. He demanded the group be renamed David Ruffin and the Temptations, mirroring Motown's rebranding of the Supremes to Diana Ross and the Supremes. It was a direct violation of the group's core principle. No one was bigger than the group. Yet, even as Ruffin clashed with the others, Eddie stood by him. He believed David was too valuable to lose. That loyalty, though, came at a cost. It drove a wedge between Eddie and the rest of the group, especially Otis Williams and Melvin Franklin, planting seeds of resentment that would only grow with time. As tensions continued to build within the group, David Ruffin took things a step further by challenging Motown's control. Around 1967, he demanded to see the group's financial records and insisted on a full accounting of their earnings. It was a bold move, one that put him in direct conflict with Berry Gordy, who didn't take kindly to artists questioning the label's authority. Meanwhile, Eddie Kendricks had his own suspicions. He began to believe that Berry Gordy's support for the Temptations was starting to wane. Some said it might have had something to do with Eddie's rumored past relationship with Diana Ross during Motown's earlier years, a connection that may not have sat well with Gordy, given his deep involvement with Ross at the time. Adding to Eddie's growing sense of unease was the decline of his childhood friend and longtime groupmate, Paul Williams. Paul's health had taken a turn for the worse, his struggle with sickle cell anemia compounded by alcoholism. He was quietly removed from his role as co-lead and choreographer and replaced by Charlie Atkins. For Eddie, this felt like another betrayal, another person he cared about being pushed out. Ruffin was officially fired from the group in 1968. Paul Williams departed a few years later in 1971. And finally, after years of internal conflict and growing disillusionment, especially with Otis Williams and Melvin Franklin, Eddie Kendricks made the decision to walk away too. He left the group in 1971, shortly after recording one of their most iconic ballads, Just My Imagination, Running Away With Me, his last hit as lead vocalist with the Temptations. By the time Eddie Kendricks finally made his exit, he had already rekindled his friendship with David Ruffin, who played a major role in encouraging him to take the leap. In truth, Eddie had been thinking about leaving for years, ever since 1965, when he first sensed the group's direction shifting away from the soulful love ballads that had defined them early on. What held him back wasn't fear, but uncertainty. He wasn't sure if he'd have the support he needed once he stepped out on his own. So he stayed, hoping the group would eventually find its way back to what it once was, all the while quietly preparing for the moment he'd finally walk away. That moment came in April 1971, marking the official end of the Classic Five. Kendricks signed a solo deal with Motown's Tamla division, ready to carve out his own path. But it wasn't smooth sailing. Despite his undeniable talent, breaking through the noise of radio without the Temptations' name proved to be a challenge, and in many ways, the shadows of his past group continued to haunt him. Meanwhile, the Temptations pushed forward, continuing their run of psychedelic soul hits under Norman Whitfield's guidance, But the split hadn't been forgotten. In fact, they fired back directly at Kendricks and Ruffin with the release of Superstar, Remember How You Got Where You Are, a not-so-subtle message that made it clear there were still hard feelings. Fast forward to 1973, Eddie Kendricks finally struck gold as a solo artist. With Keep On Truckin', produced by Frank Wilson, he hit #1 on the U.S. pop charts, making him the only member of the Temptations to ever reach that milestone on his own. The song also made waves overseas, climbing to #18 in the UK, selling over 1 million copies, and earning a gold disc. Off the momentum of that hit, he released several more successful singles. In 1974, Boogie Down soared to #2 in the US and hit #39 in the UK. But despite these victories, Eddie's solo stardom never fully reached its potential. Creative differences and financial issues with the labels he signed kept his career from reaching the consistent heights it could have. Then came a devastating blow: the death of his childhood friend and former bandmate Paul Williams on August 17, 1973. The circumstances surrounding Paul's passing were murky, and they weighed heavily on Eddie. He struggled to believe the official story. Just weeks before, they had spoken, and Paul had sounded like he was turning a corner, regaining strength and finding his way back. The loss shattered Eddie's peace of mind. Paranoia began to creep in. He believed people were out to silence him, and over time, he withdrew, trusting fewer and fewer people. Those closest to him say he was never the same after Paul's death. Combined with the ups and downs of his solo career, the emotional weight took a toll. As the years went on, Eddie's cigarette habit, already significant, intensified, becoming a visible reflection of the pain he carried. Eddie Kendricks reunited with the Temptations in 1982, and while the comeback was warmly welcomed by fans, it also revealed just how much his health had begun to decline. Years of heavy smoking had taken a toll on his voice. Those signature high notes that once soared now came with effort. Around that time, he was diagnosed with the early stages of lung cancer. But when presented with the option of chemotherapy, Eddie declined. The thought of losing his hair was too much for him to bear. By 1989, Kendricks found himself back in the spotlight when he, along with David Ruffin and the rest of the Temptations, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The night was a celebration, but it also sparked a new idea. Kendricks and Ruffin teamed up with fellow former Temptation Dennis Edwards, and together they began touring and recording under the name Ruffin, Kendricks, and Edwards, former leads of the Temptations. For a moment, it felt like a second wind, but it didn't last. In 1991, just as the trio seemed to be gaining traction, tragedy struck again. Kendrick's cancer had progressed, and Ruffin died suddenly of an apparent drug overdose. That moment marked the beginning of the end, not just for the group, but for Kendricks personally. What happened at Ruffin's funeral spoke volumes about Eddie's life after his Temptations days. Security at the service reportedly asked Kendricks to leave after he tried to approach the casket, an incident that seemed to mirror the isolation and misfortune that had quietly followed him for years. Despite his talents and success, Kendricks never seemed to find lasting peace. The ups and downs of his solo career, the deaths of those closest to him, and a series of personal missteps, including strained relationships with his children and struggles in his romantic life, left him wrestling with regret. He once admitted that while he had been blessed in many areas, love was not one of them. And in the end, that haunting sense of loneliness seemed to be the one thing that never left his side. Toward the end of his life, Eddie Kendricks found himself facing a series of hard truths. He was arrested for failing to meet his child support obligations to his ex-wife, Patricia, a low point that could have gone much worse, until Martha Reeves stepped in. She called Barry Gordy, who, despite a long and complicated history with Kendricks, agreed to post his bail. It was a gesture that caught Eddie off guard. The two had rarely seen eye to eye, but that act of kindness made Eddie pause. It was a turning point, one that pushed him to reflect on his life and begin making peace with those he'd fallen out with. Around that time, Kendricks underwent major surgery. One of his lungs was removed in an effort to stop the spread of cancer. Still, he wasn't ready to stop performing. Alongside Dennis Edwards, he continued touring through the end of 1991, determined to do what he loved for as long as he could. But his health was rapidly declining. By mid-1992, after falling seriously ill again, Kendricks was forced to cut the tour short and was hospitalized once more. During those final months, something shifted in him. He became focused on healing old wounds and reconnecting with the people he'd drifted from. He even asked to be baptized before he died, and his mother helped make sure it happened while he was still in the hospital. On October 5, 1992, Eddie Kendricks passed away at the age of 52 at Baptist Medical Center Princeton in Birmingham, Alabama. His final years had been marked by pain, reflection, and a quiet search for redemption. He was survived by his 3 children, Paris, A.A., and Paul, the latter named in honor of his dear friend Paul Williams. A funeral service was held at First Baptist Church in Ensley, Alabama, and he was laid to rest at Elmwood Cemetery in Birmingham, back home, where it all began. Though his later years were difficult, Eddie Kendricks is remembered not just for his unmistakable falsetto, but for his heart. He gave generously, looked out for others, and never forgot where he came from. On October 16, 1999, the city of Birmingham honored him with the dedication of the Eddie Kendricks Memorial Park, a lasting tribute to a man who helped shape soul music and put his hometown on the map. At the time of his death in 1992, Eddie Kendricks had an estimated net worth of $5 million. This wealth was largely built on a music career that spanned more than 3 decades. Known for his smooth falsetto and standout lead vocals on classics like Just My Imagination, Running Away with Me, The Way You Do the Things You Do, and Get Ready, Kendricks played a key role in shaping the group's sound and success during the 1960s and early 70s. Royalties from both his group and solo work remained a steady source of income throughout his life. Outside of music, Kendricks quietly supported various charitable causes, particularly in his hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. Though not one to publicize his giving, he contributed to youth arts programs and community initiatives, reflecting his belief in nurturing the next generation. He remained connected to the city that raised him, often giving back in ways that went under the radar. His legacy is now permanently etched into Birmingham's landscape. In 1999, the city unveiled the Eddie Kendrick Memorial Park in his honor. Located in downtown Birmingham, the park features a bronze statue of Kendrick's mid-performance, surrounded by sculptures of his Temptations bandmates. Eddie Kendricks once lived in a charming home that reflected both his soulful spirit and the era in which he rose to fame. His house, located in the Los Angeles area, was a modest yet elegant mid-century ranch-style residence, typical of the 1960s and 70s. The exterior was characterized by clean lines, a low-pitched roof, and large windows that allowed sunlight to flood the interior, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. Inside, the home featured a cozy living room with wood-paneled walls and plush carpeting, echoing the stylish trends of the time. The decor was simple but tasteful, with touches of retro flair. Vintage furniture, patterned textiles, and framed vinyl records from Kendricks's legendary career adorned the walls. The kitchen was functional yet welcoming, a space where family and friends could gather comfortably. The bedrooms were intimate, offering a quiet retreat from the bustling world of show business. Today, the house still stands, preserved but touched by the inevitable passage of time. While the original charm remains, modern renovations have updated the home to meet contemporary standards. Fresh paint brightens the walls, and the once shag carpeting has been replaced by hardwood floors that blend classic appeal with modern elegance. The large windows remain a highlight, now outfitted with energy-efficient glass that keeps the home bright and eco-friendly. Though Eddie Kendricks has long since passed, the house remains a silent tribute to his legacy, a physical reminder of a musical legend's humble roots and personal sanctuary. What are your thoughts on Eddie Kendricks's life beyond the music? The struggles he faced, his net worth, and the circumstances surrounding his sad death? How do you think his personal story shapes the legacy he left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to learn more about the inside of Eddie Kendricks's abandoned house, his financial journey, and the challenges he endured, be sure to like this content and subscribe for more in-depth stories about his life and legacy.